sign in, and at the end of this, you all should have an evaluation sheet, and I would appreciate you filling that out. Today we began a discussion on active listening, as opposed to apathetic listening. So to get us started, I would like for everybody to find one person that you can look at, and that person looks back at you, and don't communicate. Ready, set, look. Wait a minute, I'm hearing giggles and I'm seeing snorts and all these things going on. What in the world is happening to you? Don't communicate. First thing we need to know are two rules of communication. And one is a blinding flash of the obvious. You cannot not communicate no matter what you do. And the other is that effective communication is a transaction, meaning you were both willing to communicate with each other even though you tried not to. And that's part of the secret of active listening, that you're willing to listen to someone else. Today we're going to talk about this skill, natural skill, learned skill. We'll talk about the benefits of active listening. We'll look at some of the challenges of active listening, which we will translate into ineffective listening. Look for some remedies to our listening, and finally some appropriate responses, because active listening does call for a response. So let's begin with this natural versus learned skill. Hearing and listening are not the same things. Hearing is when sound waves go down into the bottom of your ear, rattle around three tender little bones down there. Those little bones do send out electronic signals to your curly brain, and your brain says, that's a sound. But until you put some meaning to that sound, you're only hearing. So let's look at this one. Active listening is a learned skill. Now let me ask you, how many of you had a course in listening in school? See, one hand over there. Anybody go to a listening workshop anywhere? Well, that leaves a big gap between those who, the one who's been trained and the rest of us. So it's no wonder that some of our listening skills might need a little polishing. Why does that happen? In school, note that what we spend our time on most is writing. We spend the next amount of time on reading. And it's a puzzle to me how in the world people can learn to write if they can't read. But that's what happens in our school systems. Some time is spent on speaking, usually with a teacher saying, get up there, it's all right, you're not going to die. Go ahead and do it, and traumatize some poor little kid who's terrified. And if there's any listening at all, many times it is the teachers yelling, be quiet and listen to me. And that is not teaching, and it's not training at all. Let's take a peek at what real life is about. Check that out. This is the amount of time that we spend listening. 55 to 60% of our time, especially for college students who are in their classrooms. Then we talk a lot. After that, we write a dab, and we might even read a little bit. But look at those differences. That inverse proportion leaves us with a gap that no one, up until now, tends to want to fill. Now, why do we need to know about active listening or good listening habits at all? There are benefits to this. We accomplish tasks when we listen well. And I had a task for you. On some of these tables, we have pencil and paper, and many of you are jotting down some notes. At this point, I would like for you to write down what type of listening you would do as far as the task is concerned. Think for just a minute now. You have a task. What kind of listening would go with task performance? How does listening help with task performance? Maybe that'll help you think through it. That isn't an easy question because probably no one has ever asked you that question before. So I'm taking you down this trail of thinking outside the box about listening. Do any of your answers there match any of these? This is how listening helps with tasks. From understanding and being able to respond to being timely, more direct. Accuracy is in there. You can make better decisions and collaborate with the people with whom you are working. And that's how listening can help you perform tasks. See what else is in here. Listening can help you with relationships, whether it's work, home, friends. So jot down what would be some of your listening habits as far as relationships go. What does that good listening achieve? Here are some of the things. See if this matches any of yours. Obviously, the emotional aspect of communication. Good listening habits have a lot of nonverbal signals. And those nonverbal signals indicate a lot about the emotions, from facial expressions to whole body language. The nonverbal cues, by the way, make up 80 to 90% of all of our messages. And so much of our relationship depends on those nonverbal cues, even more so than the content of what you have to say. So we can meet the uniqueness or see the uniqueness of other people when we listen well. We can get feedback on how we behave if we're watching the other people. So we can share information, and by the way, for couples, conflict is not a bad thing if both listen and both are honest. I'll repeat that. Conflict is not a bad thing when both people are open and honest. In fact, if you can survive the conflict, you are much closer as a couple because you know more about each other. You can have less stressful encounters if you listen well and respond well, build some trust, and have some respect for other people. So those are the relational functions of this, or these benefits. And finally, if we're good listeners, we can appreciate and enjoy what we hear. When you leave here, you'll probably jump in a vehicle, turn on some music, the radio, something like that. Barely pay attention to it, but enjoy what you have going on there. Now then, in order to be able to do this, there's some things we need to pay attention to, and it would be the listening process. These items have to happen. They have to happen pretty much in this order for us to be able to call it listening, and certainly active listening. First, we have to be able to hear what the sound is, and then pay attention to it. And at this point, I like to use the little story or the little analogy that if you have a squeaky screen door and it's hot summertime and you want to leave some of the doors and the windows open to get a breeze, in the middle of the night, if you hear that screen door squeaking, you're going to pay attention to it. You've ignored it all day long. But in the middle of the night, that is a different story, a different sound. You will pay attention to it. Then you've got to understand what in the world's going on. Why is that door squeaking? Then how you respond to it, you either jump under the bed or out of bed. And remember that you probably want to lock the doors the next time. So these items have to happen. You have to hear it, pay attention to it, understand what is going on, respond to it, that's what makes it active, and then remember. And for some of us, it's hard to remember what we said until someone reminds us what we said. Now that brings up this notion of challenges. What are the barriers that we find with active listening? The first one that we see we call pseudo-listening, or pretending to listen. We all know people like this. We may be like this, pretending to listen. And as I talk with people sometimes, their eyes don't quite glaze over. But if I ask them at the end, what did I just say? They have no clue. But they were going, the whole time. Here's another one. I bet you know someone at this that does this. Isn't that irritating? The stage hogger, eating up the time, and doesn't want to do any of the listening and participation in there. Now these two, selective and insulated listening, the selective listening is the area where you listen to only what you want to hear. Insulated listening is tuning out what you don't want to hear. So if somebody is chewing on you, you can get insulated there and tune them out. If they're praising you, that's the part you want to listen to. So what happens in business when there's evaluation and you are called into your supervisor's office for your evaluation? You know this is going to be the good news and the bad news, or you hope there's some good news in there. So for self-improvement, we have to recognize that we are going to hear things we love and things we don't want to hear. And yet, we have to tell ourselves we must pay attention to it, understand and respond to the things that could be painful, and work things out with our supervisors. That makes us defensive sometimes. It even tends to have some people ask questions and try to find out something just so they can throw it back at you. Let's see about this. How insensitive can we be? Let's try another. Misunderstandings. Sometimes when we think we have heard something, we don't have the same perception of it that the person who spoke that meant, and there can be some misunderstandings. Now these are obviously actors, but these are actors' voices. Let me put it that way.
Judge, send her in.
Mr. President.
Oh, Condoleezza, nice to see you. What's happening?
Well, Mr. President, I have the report here about the new leader in China.
Great, Condi, lay it on me.
Mr. President, who is the new leader of China?
Well, that's what I want to know.
Well, that's what I'm telling you, Mr. President.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, Condi. Who is the new leader of China?
Yes.
I mean the fellow's name.
Hugh.
The guy in China.
Hugh.
The new leader of China.
Hugh.
The Chinaman.
Hugh is leading China, Mr. President.
What are you asking me for?
I'm telling you, Hugh is leading China.
Well, I'm asking you, Condi, who is leading China?
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Will you or will you not tell me the name of the new leader of China?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Arafat is in China. I thought he was in the Middle East.
That's correct, sir.
Then who's in China?
Yes, sir.
Yasser's in China?
No, sir.
Then who is?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir?
No, sir.
Connie, you're starting to piss me off now. It's not because you're black, neither. I need to know the name of the new leader of China, so I want you to get me the Secretary General of the United Nations on the phone.
Coffee, Annan?
No, thanks. And Connie, call me George. Stop with that ebonics crap.
You want coffee?
No.
You don't want coffee?
No, but now you mention it, I could use a glass of milk. And then get me the UN.
Yes, sir.
Not yes, sir. The guy at the United Nations.
Coffee.
Milk! Will you please make that call?
And call who?
Well, who's the guy at the UN?
No, who is the guy in China?
Will you stay out of China?
Yes, sir.
And stay out of the Middle East. Just get me the guy at the UN.
Coffee.
All right, with cream and 2 sugars. Now get on the phone.
Hello, Rice here.
Rice, good idea. And get a couple of egg rolls too, Condi. Maybe we should send some to the guy in China and the Middle East. And you get Chinese food in the Middle East? I don't know.
Who is not there anymore? And the minute his name was mentioned as a leader in China, I knew we were going to have fun with that. So what you think you hear may not be what the other person meant when they said that. So we can get some dandy misunderstandings when it comes to listening or trying to listen accurately. Now, what are we going to do about this? We've looked over some of these things of defensive listening, selective listening, insulated listening, insensitive, ambushing, pseudo-listening, all of these types of things. And there are remedies to it. So to be blunt, here we go. If we give the other person a chance to talk, get rid of the distractions, hear the whole story before you jump to conclusions or judge or evaluate the person, and listen for the key words. Most people, when they are telling you something, will have key words in there. If you're sitting in class, there should be key words in a lecture or a discussion that are going on. And some of these remedies are so easy if you'll just remember to do them. So let's look now at some of these responses that we can use that are appropriate for active listening. Silence is an appropriate response many times. When someone needs to blow off steam, they just need someone to listen and not make many comments, perhaps prompt them to speak more. That's where the legitimate, or tell me more, or what else? Those types of prompts to get someone to continue talking because it makes them feel better. It's a cathartic type of listening for them. So silence is a part of active listening. Sincere questioning. Sincere versus counterfeit, ambushing them, those types of things, or asking leading questions to get the answer you want to hear instead of what they want to say or what they need to say. So sincere questioning is an honest question. And they can tell that almost by the tone of your voice. Paraphrasing or reflecting. And once you've asked a question and they start telling you something about it, you can repeat that back in your own words to make sure you understand if that's what they mean. And that gives them a chance to respond to you. And they would either say, yes, that's what I mean, or no, that's not what I meant. And you can clarify that. Reflection is different, however, because reflection is repeating the exact same words back to someone. Now, paraphrasing doesn't take much time. Reflection does. And if you have time and it's a crisis situation, then reflection is the very best way. I'll give you this example. When I taught at my university in Missouri, I had a student call one day and he was terribly upset, and I asked him, what is wrong? You sound distressed. And he said, I am. A friend of mine just called and said he was going to commit suicide, and I don't know what to do. So I told him there were 3 questions that he could have asked his friend. Does he have the means? Where's he going to do it? How is he going to do it? And instead of starting off like that, my response to him was, he said he was going to commit suicide, and then I waited. There's the secret, silence. It gives the other person a chance to process what is said, and they will usually give you more information. So instead of giving him the questions then, I needed more information and got that. Then I said, here are the common questions you usually ask someone when they say that. And if it looks like they're really going to do that, then you can call the authorities, you can call the police. Because in Missouri, they could pick up someone who had threatened suicide and hold them for their own good until a physician could be there, or they could be moved to a hospital. But they could arrest them for their own good. So after we talked about that a little bit, he said, okay, I'll go try this. And I said, please call me back and let me know what happens. Well, the next day he called back, and he said, the guy didn't commit suicide. And I waited. He said, he told me, that's all right, he's just funning me. I said, is this a friend? He said he was. And so that was the opening to ask a few more questions to get him to talk to me about how he felt about being used. So when you use questioning and paraphrasing and reflection and a variety of these things and listen to people, you can get a lot done for the other person and for yourself. So being a good listener has not only cathartic benefits, but it can be life-saving if you do it well. Here are some other things we use. Advising. My advice to you is don't do it. Unless someone wants your advice, listen to them. Ask them questions. I had a stepson who wanted to move in with us, and his dad said, oh, no way. And I told him he was welcome there. We had rules of the house, but he was certainly welcome there. And he would come over, and he wanted to talk. And I was not about to give advice because his mother would have killed me, and, oh, Lord, you don't want to get into all that kind of mess. But what I did was ask him questions and ask him what he thought his options were to whatever his problem was. And then we would look at the pros and the cons of these options so he could make up his mind. I never had to give him advice. Just talk him through the pros and cons of the options in there. And he always chose the right answer. But it was his answer. And kept me out of trouble. Kept him out of trouble too. So advising people, it can be dangerous. It can blow up in your face because if it doesn't work, it's not their fault. You told me so. And there you're in trouble too. People don't like to be judged or evaluated. Unless they ask you for it, they don't want to hear that at all. Certainly you can be supportive, but how you are supportive gets interesting because many times when we are trying to help people, we end up putting them down. Let's say you have a test and you're really nervous about it, just freaked out about it, and I'm trying to help you, and I said, don't worry about that, it's only a test. So she's going to feel like I'm freaking out over nothing, but that doesn't let my stress level come down. It's really putting you down by not acknowledging, yeah, that can be a scary thing, and yes, you're nervous. So sometimes when we think we are helping people, it's perceived as a put down. Who wants to be analyzed? That drives people crazy. If you can ask them the pros and cons of their options, they do their own analysis. And since they own it, they're more likely to buy into it. So when we see that we have all of these options in active listening, we see that there are benefits to it. It is a learned skill. We see that we have task and relational and entertainment and appropriate and appreciative types of listening there. But the good news is we have remedies to poor listening. And I've just given you some of the ways of appropriate responses that you can use. The one thing that I want to add to our list up here is called perception checking. One's perception becomes one's reality. And many times, our perception has nothing to do with the truth. So here is a 3-step way that you can check perception and avoid probably 95% of the misunderstandings if you do it at the time. The first thing you do is identify a specific behavior or a specific comment of some sort. Identify that. Then offer a couple of alternatives for that behavior. And step 3, ask a clarifying question. So number 1 was to identify a specific behavior or comment. Number 2 was to offer a couple of alternatives about why that happened. And number 3, ask a clarifying question. Now I'm going to pick on you. Her son was in my speech class. And let's say he came in one day and said, I've been an FFA and an FFA president and speaker for 2 or 3 years now. What do you think you're going to be able to teach me about speaking? Burr is a lot taller than I am. Good looking kid, but big. So how am I going to handle this? Am I going to be defensive like Dilbert? And my ears are sticking out and all this business? No. Because he's already defensive. It takes 2 to fight. I'm not going to fight. What I'm going to do is say, when you ask what are you going to do to help me learn how to speak, I don't know if you're asking me to help you polish what you already know, or you might not want to do the work that it takes in this class. So fill me in. What is the problem? Do you hear the difference in the tone of voice? Tone of voice, by the way, is a nonverbal signal. When your tone of voice is not aggressive or accusatory, it only leaves one person to fight. You will find that little formula to be magic. At this point, you've been very good listeners, but do you have any questions for me? Yes, sir.
What if you have a problem understanding what the other person is saying? Let's say that mentally you have seizures or some kind of impairment that could slow your thinking. How do you respond to other people in a situation like that?
Which one has the seizures? The listener or the speaker?
The listener.
The listener? That's what I would say. I'm sorry, I do not think quickly, because as one girl in class said today, I'm a little wacky, but I'm damn unique. And she is. And she has a brain tumor. So excellent, timely question there. I will be honest. I would be honest with you. You know, when you call the help centers and someone has a different accent, and you have to keep asking them over and over and over, what did you say? Can you spell that? That is a real problem, and I have finally learned, after that first sentence that I couldn't understand, I have finally learned to say, I have a funny accent, and so do you. So let's go slowly here, and I hope you won't be offended if I ask you to repeat or I ask you to spell a word. And please feel free to do the same for me. And I found that we end up communicating pretty well. We say the same thing 4 or 5 times until we get it. But being honest, people respond to honesty. And you can tell non-verbally if they're being honest or not. It's an excellent question, very timely. Others? Yes?
How would you address a state law? Say you're going to have one in the I can convey to that person without offending them.
I'm not sure I would worry about whether or not I offended them because they don't care how they're coming across to anyone else. Oh, Lord. Family is the most difficult one to work with, but the family member, I'm going to lay this down right here, don't let me lose it. For the family member, wait until they get to a breath, number one. And I would just say, stop, verbally, stop. I have something to say. But have something to say if you do that. Otherwise, it's just on and on and on and on and on. It'll surprise them, I'll tell you that. They might duck. Other questions?
When you encourage students or something shy, very closed mouth to speak, I used to know kids open mouth, learn.
Right.
But I mean, you have all students want to be shy.
Oh, yes. Communication is situational. So in the classroom, it is my job to get them to open up, to speak up. So it doesn't bother me at all to say, I want you to learn how to project so we can hear you. And I'm going to stand back over here, and you don't need to yell at me, but take a deep breath and just simply think to that back wall when you speak. And they feel like they're yelling at first, but they do get louder and we can hear them. And otherwise, the part of this question is what do you do with students or people who don't even open their mouths enough to speak? And I talk with them privately. And we articulate and slow down and exaggerate, and I try to get them to move their jaws, and they just feel like they're going to be the whale before they get out of there. But it helps them because they can hear themselves better. But part of that hearing themselves better has a mishmash of noise in there of I am scared to death, and that is a chemical reaction. It's a stress reaction. How many of you have been in a class and the teacher suddenly asked you a question and you were totally brain dead? That is a chemical reaction. It's very normal. It's the fight or flight reaction. I want to get out of there, and the only thing I can think of is where's that door? So when I work with students, I'm careful. I know they're going to be embarrassed no matter what I do. So I try to be as gentle in the embarrassment as possible. But I do a lot of private discussion of what I see, and I use perception checking all the time. I notice that when you speak, identify the specific behavior. When you speak, you don't open your mouth very wide. And I don't know if that would be painful or you're afraid to speak up or what. Tell me what's going on. And that's a kind tone, kind, gentle tone in there. And I can get them to talk with me. And I'm glad I thought of those two alternatives, because the other day in one of the classes, and it was speech class, I asked a friendly guy, he doesn't seem to be shy at all, but I asked him if he could speak up because we could barely hear him. And bless his heart, he has a broken jaw. So I said, you just make noise where you're comfortable, and then we'll work our way through this later. Good questions. Other thoughts? Well, at this point, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming, for being so attentive. This is what we have covered today. And I will leave you with this. It is the province of knowledge to speak, but it's the privilege of wisdom to listen. Thank you very much for coming.